This is my summary on the chapter 12 and 13 terminologies explained. So I decided to do it over a PowerPoint because I thought it'd be easier that way, kind of keep things a little bit more organized. So starting off, we started with the cognitive tasks. The first one that we had to do was classification, which is sorting by similarities, and classification was listed as having two parts, which was sorting and grouping objects. The next one was seriation, and the first thing that stood out in here was seriation sounds a whole lot like the word series. So seriation is placing things in an order, almost in a ranking system. An example of this will be placing things in order from biggest to smallest. The next one was number concepts, which is an understanding of numbers and quantity. So examples of this would include counting in the early stages and understanding terms like few and lots. So children also come to realize that number names are representative of an amount. The next one was temporal concepts, which has to do with time. So it involves an understanding of time in the past, present, and future. In the early years, children understand time in relation to events instead of thoroughly understanding its concept. So for young kids, they rely on time markers. So an example of this would be telling them that they'll go to recess after lunch instead of telling them that recess is at 12:30. The next one was spatial concepts, which involves the understanding of how objects occupy and move in space. So this can involve relations between people, objects, or a combination of both. An example of this is saying that the ball rolled across the room, or he stood behind the girl in line. The stick was dragged through the sand, things like that. The next one was acquisition of information, and this involves making connections through things that children have learned and applying their knowledge to certain situations. So acquiring information helps kids to build background knowledge used to make connections, and acquisition of information is used in all of the previously listed cognitive tasks that we just talked about, and a mix of them are often used together. And the next topic was math concepts. So there are 6 elements of math concepts: number of operations, algebra, geometry, measurement, problem solving, and data analysis and probability. So first, to start off with number and operations, this is understanding the number of objects in a group and arranging objects in an order, which is very, very similar, if not classification and seriation, which we talked about earlier. So with algebra is just understanding relationships and being able to repeat patterns. Geometry is recognizing the characteristics of shapes. Measurement is linked to seriation also, and measurements can either be standard or non-standard. So measuring in inches or centimeters, or measured by saying it's like the length of something, an object. Problem solving would be like using past experiences, previous knowledge, and tools to come to a conclusion to figure out an issue or problem. Data analysis and probability is figuring out the likeliness of an event occurring and reflecting on data and outcomes by asking probing questions. And next we had science concepts. So I think there were 3 elements to the science concepts. The first one being life science. So life sciences covers an understanding of the human body, like parts, body senses, and how to care for yourself. So introducing these topics to kids. Other topics that are included in life science include plants and animals and their environments, as well as like the life cycle of plants, things like that. The next one was physical science, which includes chemistry, physics, and also learning about the weather. And then the third and final was environmental education and recycling, which teaches children how to care for the world around them and how to correctly discard items. So, specifically looking at discarding items in terms of recycling, recycling would connect to the cognitive element of classification, since recycled items are often sorted before they're discarded. And next we had a language meaning. So the parts of this include vocabulary, first of all. So, of course, vocabulary is words that show a child's language development. There are typical age ranges for the amount of words that children recognize by age, which is based on an average estimate. Semantics was next, which is the understanding of word meaning in multiple contexts. Like if you put a word and you use it in a different context, that meaning of the word might change depending on how it's used. Next, we had language rules. So there were 3 of these listed. Morphology is based on morphemes, which has to do with the smallest unit of a word that carries meaning. So an example of this would use prefixes and suffixes. So a morpheme in a word like preheat, the morpheme would be pre. So next, for syntax, I understood this as grammatical rules that apply to a combination of words. And finally, pragmatics, which is modifying how you speak depending on the audience and the social situation that you're in. So in short, this would be speaking appropriately in the situation depending on if you're talking to a friend or if you're talking to a teacher. You would obviously talk to them differently because the social situation is different. And next, strategies for second language learners. So, strategies for second language learners included keeping the atmosphere consistent and welcoming, which will help to facilitate the child learning English. Encouraging interaction between students who speak the same first language. And another thing that I noted was that silent assimilation is often a part of learning a new language, so children should not be forced to speak. And even though it may not look like they're participating, they're still learning that language. Next would be involving the child's interest and their experiences. While you're trying to teach them English, trying to involve the child's culture through literature, and encouraging communication without being critical with children. So when they decide to share something, encouraging that. And then I think finally it was language activities. So the 3 of these that were listed was reading, poetry, and storytelling. So reading can be done either in a group setting or individually. It can be done small group, whole class, or independent reading. So this introduces children to new vocabulary. It also builds background knowledge and encourages critical thinking. Next, with poetry, this introduces students to patterns of speech and literary elements, as well as other uses of language, just how the poet uses language individually. Storytelling, like reading, this can be done in multiple settings. You can tell that between partners. You can tell stories to the class and small groups, many different ways. So this promotes participation by involving the arts if the story is acted out. Otherwise, it just acts as a form of conversation almost. And that is it.